Yeah. Speaking of college football, so I mean, in the draft is obviously a convergence of pro and college football. I love this whole Andrew Luck, GM of Stanford, and like now college football has an NFL feel where teams are paying
Yeah.
players and there's a general manager. Um, I got into this a conversation the other day with somebody about the NFL draft and Deion Sanders, and Deion looks like he is all in on Colorado, and he looks like he is stepping back on helicoptering as a dad, which I understand, on his son Shador Sanders. Um, are you surprised that Deion Sanders appears to be all in on college football and all in the most unlikely place that Deion Sanders, a Christian man, would land, Boulder, Colorado, which is, you can smell the cannabis from Denver. It is a quirky, anti-establishment. I mean, it's Eugene, Oregon, which I love,
Yeah.
but I would have never guessed that Deion Sanders would have picked Colorado. And when he signed that extension, I thought, Jesus, he's really all in on this thing. Are you surprised?
A little. I always give a guy a lot of credit, and I don't have Dion's financials in front of me, but I think it's safe to say he did not need to go into college football for money. Like he was already pretty well off and done pretty well financially. And one thing, once his children leave, right, to go to the NFL, he easily could
Right.
have been like, "It's been a good run. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
do it for a couple more." It feels
Yes.
like Deion Sanders more than likely is going to be coaching for years to come, and eventually, I expect him one day to be in the SEC or some big program.
Right.
John Lynch did the same thing. It's like, John Lynch really going to be the GM? 9 years later, the guy's all in. He's going through like transitional periods. He's like, "Let's do it." It's like these guys love football. I mean, having been around coaches and these players that get into coaching, you got to be a football addict. And I think people underestimate, especially Dion. I'll never forget. I've told this story before. Bobby April, who was a special teams coach in Atlanta, he's like, everyone got it wrong with Dion because at the time he's in these music videos and the chains and kind of just the way he carried himself. This guy sat in the front of my meetings. No one practiced harder, and like he was just a special guy to coach. He's like, no one I would rather coach than a guy like Deion Sanders. And I think if you would ask me at 15 years old in the mid 90s, like Deion would have felt like a pain in the butt, like a TO. He was the
Right.
opposite, I think, as a player. People loved coaching him. Here's the other thing he's got going on now. His buddies are with him. Warren Sapp's his defensive line coach. Marshall Falk's his running back coach. I bet he's just pretty cool place to work. Plus, here's the thing with Colorado. They kind of needed him more than he needed them. And now
Yes.
they've paid him a lot of money. Like, and the other thing with the transfer portal, if you're willing to cut checks, I think obviously you're going to have advantages at Texas or Ohio State, but at Colorado, the other thing, look at his conference. Why can't he compete? Oklahoma State's kind of falling apart, and T. Boone Pickens is no longer around. Why couldn't he make serious? Arizona State was just in the playoffs. Dion's got to
Yes.
be thinking, if we can recruit pretty well the next couple of years, why couldn't we win 10, 11 games and win this conference and get a bid? And he's not wrong. And then eventually, if Florida or one of those schools calls, I think he would eventually take it. But I don't think he's just leaving for a quote unquote like lateral job anymore. It would have to be a cream of the crop gig. Like they're paying him what? Basically 10, 11, 12 million dollars a year for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I've got to be upfront here. I always thought Dion was a little inauthentic. I mean, I knew he had a belief, religious conviction, but he was always a little showy for me. The Tim McCarver baseball stuff.
That's what Bobby April used to say. Don't let that fool you, because
Yeah.
at his core, he loves when they were for his first year during spring practice, they were tackling to the ground. And I went, where Dion gets mistaken by a lot of people. This guy's an 80s, 90s football guy. This guy grew up around George Seifert with those Cowboy teams. Even the Atlanta teams, when he first got there, weren't terrible. Like this guy was used to a culture in football that is not the culture now, right? That's why when the story came out about Troy Taylor, who Andrew Luck just fired and Stanford fired, I was like, there's not enough detail. Like, is this guy just an asshole, or is he legitimately crossing the line? Because football culture is not like a pretty place. You're getting yelled at a lot of swear words.
Yeah.
It's just an edgy environment, off season and in season. And I think Deion's very comfortable in football. Certain people you're comfortable behind a mic. Deion's just comfortable around football players, running football practice. Now clearly, I was impressed with Warren Sapp. They hired him to be the
Yes.
D-line coach, and by mid-season, I was gambling on Colorado a lot. I was like, God, their defensive line is really improved.
Yeah, it's just there are things. I'll be honest with you. Sports right now is at an interesting place. Baseball's on fire. I mean, the
Yeah,
torpedo bats. I
it's
mean, there's
awesome.
just it's great. And I mean, women's basketball. Caitlin Clark is she's a real sensation. I mean, the Jimmy Butler move to the Warriors and Luka LeBron is absolutely infused the league. There's no question. And the college football playoff. I told J Mac and I talked about this week, and I said when I got into this business, like when football ended, you had like a month of it was dead. And I'm like, well, now football's been extended 2 weeks, and they're going to add an 18th game, and they're going to give us another bye, so that will extend it 2 more weeks. And I'm like, football now is Labor Day to March 1st. You get a week on vacation, you come back, it's free agency and the tournament. And I really like what college football is doing. I'm not a traditionalist. And I do think the NIL bringing in general managers now is necessary. I don't want Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day being capologists. Like, let's get somebody in the building that knows what the hell they're doing. But I, the only fear I have about football. This is weird, but remember a few years ago when the NFL really made a point of targeting women and moms because you were having in certain states the turnout level dropped precipitously with concussion fears. And I was thinking about this the other day, John. I don't remember a draft with less hyperbole. People are saying this is as bad a draft as we've had. Like outside of running back and maybe defensive tackle, there's just not a ton of talent. And I do wonder if this is the first draft, and now the NBA, 2 out of 3 drafts don't give us much. I mean, Cooper Flag is a domestic product this good is so rare. You can't even name the last domestic product that looked this good. Zion was fantastic, but he didn't have the dimensions and the dexterity and the overall game of Cooper Flag. He was a torque machine. He wasn't this. He wasn't close to this. His game didn't look like this. Is that in college football, I'm wondering if about every third or fourth draft, this point forward, because turnout levels have dropped, because there's a fear of concussions with kids, I wonder if we're going to become the NFL. It's got a little NBA feel to it. Last year, John, you had 10 virtually unwatchable teams, double the number of teams that were non-competitive by early December. Do you think it's possible with lower turnouts and that the game will start to be a little more NBA, which there is 8 great, 8 okay, and 12 unwatchables? Sorry to interrupt this great video, but please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. Now back to the video.
I do think the NFL drafts have always been like, you have some bad drafts. They don't happen as frequently, I would say, as the NBA. But last year looks like it has a chance to be like a historically great quarterback draft, which is pretty crazy. I mean, obviously they had 12 guys in the top, or 6 guys in the top 12, but 3 of them are already pretty good. I would say that one concerning part in football is, Brady's big thing. It's never been easier to play quarterback, and he's not wrong because you don't get penalized throwing over the middle. They can't hit you. But the quarterback play can be pretty bad. I mean, I feel like guys like 15 through 32 are really hit or miss, and their backups. And I think a lot of this is the training in college now with guys transferring. The training in the pros, you don't have as much. I mean, training camp, I feel, and again, the salary cap has changed things. But I remember growing up, a lot of teams went too deep with starters.
Yes.
Like their backup was like DeBerg or whoever. And it was like that guy could be a starter somewhere else. And that really isn't the case anymore. It feels like a lot of teams, like if their starter gets hurt, they will lose every single week.
Yeah.
And so I think the importance on the quarterback is awesome when it works, when you nail it. But
Yeah.
if you miss or that guy gets injured, the fall off is precipitous and it's a problem. But I do think that if you just look over the next couple years, I think the talent in college football feels pretty high. Now the difference though is, if I was an offensive lineman and I went to Iowa or Wisconsin or just some of these schools, like I was going to get developed and more than likely I was going to get drafted if I was a good player. Even if I wasn't a first round pick, second, third, fourth round, I'd play in the NFL a long time. Well, now if I'm starting at Iowa, they're like, God, this guy's an all conference guy. Ohio State, Georgia, and Texas call you. So you start moving around in your development. Maybe you change
Yes.
schemes.
Good
And
point.
I do wonder in football,
Good point.
in the NFL, like part of the reason I saw Kyle Shanahan, he's like, God, I didn't expect our backup tackle to get $15 million a year. Well, I was texting with Andy. They love the guy because they think, the only reason he didn't start is because Hall of Fame tackle, and that guy has played before. They like what they saw, and they know he's a good guy, and they know he's been coached well. Same place, same coaching staff for 4 years. So that guy, you don't last that long, and they depend on you to basically be their swing tackle for 4 straight years if they don't think really highly of you. Now, do they overpay a little bit? We can debate that, but they know exactly who's been coaching him. In college, it's like, well, he's been two different programs and three different coordinators. It's a lot of movement now, changing stuff, which I think the front offices are still trying to get a feel for that because
Yes.
it's never quite been. With quarterbacks, it's a little easier. With some of these other positions, is their development? Do they actually have room to grow in the pros? That maybe they would have been maxed out before.
Yeah, I mean, take Will Howard. I liked him at Kansas State. And then at Ohio State, did my perception change and my expectations because I didn't like him as much? Because I was like, well, they have better talent. You have to be consistently good. Kyle McCord at Ohio State, I was like ham and egger. Then I watched them at Syracuse and I'm like, shit, that's a second round pick. That guy's good. So I'm wondering if scouts are doing that. Like just Ohio State quarterbacks. I'm like, Will Howard, I wanted more. I saw him at Kansas State. I wanted more. I'm disappointed. He may not have changed at all. Kyle McCord, I'm now on a high because I think he played with far less talent and he put up huge numbers.
Well, we talked about Purdy. Purdy's a good example. After his junior year at Iowa State, when he was really good and they were competing to be like a top 15 team, you don't think teams, I mean, Oregon's done this now like 3 years in a row. They, Dylan Gabriel, Bo Nix, teams like that would have called Brock Purdy. And who knows, maybe Brock Purdy then goes to Oregon. He's playing on national television games. And if he's good, instead of going last pick in the 7th round, maybe Purdy goes in the 4th or the 3rd round.
Yeah.
So look at these transfer quarterbacks. Besides J.J. McCarthy, last year, all transfer guys. Drake May didn't, but remember, Mac Brown came out going into his junior year, was like, he's offered $5 million. Luckily, he's loyal to us. And it was pretty clear, like the three teams offering him that much money. This year, all the quarterbacks are transfer guys. Cam Ward, this is his third school. Shador, Kyle McCord. It's like Cam Ward is a great example. He was going to the East-West Shrine game when he decided to commit to Miami. He probably would have gone probably 3rd or 4th round last year. Now he's been, I mean, the Titans, from what I've heard, I was in Nashville a month ago, pretty good source. They'd been dead set on him for like a month. This guy's going the #1 pick, all because he transferred. If I were these quarterbacks, it's a no-brainer if you get the opportunity to jump up to a top 20 team. And even if and it's not just Washington State. What if you're at like Minnesota or some of these programs and you can just take that next step? So that's where in the conference, the top dogs they're just feeder systems. All these programs beside the top 15, 20 programs are essentially now the Billy Bean Oakland A's. They're a minor league program that I'm eventually going to take your best players.
Yeah, the NIL, one of the things I love about sports is innovation because it makes me think. I get bored of just watching game after game after game.
Same.
Like I like trades, I like acquisitions, I love free agency, period. And the NIL, it can be tricky because there's so much mobility and movement among coaches and players. Like in the NFL, the pension is so good for a coach. I mean, Dante Scarnecchia could have bounced around and made more money. He's like, I'm going to stay here. Pension's going to be great. I'm going to make $20,000 a month pension once I leave this sport. Why bounce around? Ernie Adams, why bounce around? But in college, you don't get that pension. So coaches are just constantly hopscotching program to program to program, and they all it's seemingly all want to be either coordinators or head coaches. And in the NFL, I find there are some position coaches that make like between 800,000 and $1.4 million. It's like
Pays a lot.
and the pensions. Herm Edwards told me his coaching pensions are better than his player pensions.
Yeah.
And so there's so much mobility at the college level for coaches, and now the players are moving. So the chances, I mean, Bo Nix, didn't he have like 5 coordinators?
Yeah, yeah, a lot. I actually have met a guy that through the podcast in Arizona that I play golf with. His son was a big Division I football recruit over the last couple of years. And he was one of those guys that showed up at school early, like right after the winter, when the start of technically the winter semester. Within 2 days of him enrolling early, his coach takes another job. And forever, the media used to freak how unfair it is, how unfair it is. That kid immediately had the opportunity to follow his coach or to go 10 other places that had been recruiting him. His phone was blowing up. Now, he chose to stay because he said it was a lot going on for an 18-year-old. But like that opportunity that you can move when stuff like that happens, to me has like neutralized the anger. The Maryland coach, everyone's up in arms. It's like, guys, the players can all leave now too. So it's like everyone is under the same umbrella of, and the difference is if I steal a coach, typically I have to pay a buyout. The players can just leave at free will, right? It's like, I mean, who knows some of these deals that are getting done. So I'm with you. I think the NIL, which is kind of stupid. I heard Deion say this. He's like, how many, beside like Shador Sanders, I turn on television, I don't see anyone in commercials. It's just pay to play, which is fine, which is eventually going to change and go to the revenue sharing, be a salary cap. And that's where, to me, the general managers, the Lombardis and the Jim Nagy's and these guys, the GM jobs in college football are paying. It's not like they're paying 100,000. Some of them are paying 7 figures. I mean, these guys are making, or even if you're making $750,000, $800,000, if you're at an SEC school, Google how much the homes are in those areas. You're one of the highest paid W-2 employees in the area.
Yeah, it's there's I look at football today, and for the first time in my life, I feel that college football has been pushed and prodded, but it is starting to now look closer to the NFL. And to me, that is a great thing because I've always said there's one big problem with college football. We have a big game problem. I mean, Labor Day weekend, you get 1 or 2 big games. NFL, every 1 o'clock window. That's the boring window. The best games are Sunday night, Fox and CBS late afternoon, and Monday night. And Thursday night now, Amazon buys big games. The 1 o'clock window has at least 2 big-time games every week. I mean, there's only like 14 games in the NFL a weekend. 7 to 8 feel big. College football's got 60 games, and 4 feel big. And I think these super conferences are creating, I mean, you look at USC's schedule this year. There's like 5, 6 games. It's like, oh, you have to watch those. Those are really exciting games. So I like the pivot. I mean, and a lot of it's Fox and ESPN said, guys, we're getting rid of the Pac-12. We're going to make these 2 super conferences. We're going to, even this expansion to 14 games in the playoffs from 12. This is all about networks. I have no problem with it. We gave college football free license forever to do what they want. And they avoided big games, and the conferences couldn't face the same number of conference opponents. It was uneven, and finally the network stepped in and said, all right, we're going to take charge. And I like it. Last year there were more big games than ever before.
Totally. And I think I'm pretty confident. I don't know when this is going to happen, but it does feel inevitable, right? That all the conferences, especially if we go to like an AFC, NFC, SEC, Big Ten, where it's headed, you play the same number of conference games, 9, and then you do some sort of rotating with those extra 3. Maybe you're allowed 1 non-Power 4, a Fresno State, San Diego State type, but no more UC Davis playing USC. Like those days have to end. You're not allowed to play a Division I AA team. So I still think we can make a couple more steps because I looked at, because I saw Belichick had not Mark Andrews, but David Andrews, his former center, talked to the team. So I Googled their schedule. I mean, they got some games on that schedule. It's like, it's not his fault. I mean, he didn't set but some of these teams still, I mean, there are weeks, Saban fought this forever. It's like no one wants to watch you play Mercer. And luckily in the NFL, even if the Eagles are playing the Titans on a given week, it could end up being a decent game. And every team has pros. Like there are such a stark difference when Texas is playing McNeese State. It's like you
Yeah.
cannot get mad at all the fraternities for not showing up to that game when it's
Right.
50-0 at halftime. So
Yeah.
I think we just keep moving forward. Especially now, you can lose games. Like there, as we expand the playoffs to go to 14 teams or whatever, there is inevitably going to be a 3-loss team getting in. I mean, there almost was this year.
Ohio State was a
Into the playoffs.
20-point favorite and lost at home to a bad Michigan team and won the Natty. So, yeah, I think, I think again, I never liked college football. It really mattered when you lost. And I watched Kansas City win a Super Bowl 2 years ago and play poorly in December. Like, they always say idealism and cynicism kill progress. And there were just college football and baseball fans, too many purists and traditionalists for me. Like, let's just make it better. Let's have more big games. Let's not crush a season because you lose in October for the second time. Like, if you reel off 7 straight wins, get you in the playoff. Like, this idea of, and there's some old things I like. There are things in sports that I miss the Rose Bowl, like when it really mattered. But how many times could I watch, Washington and Iowa? Like, let's at some point, and I think what happens, John, and I've over the course of my life, I've learned this. Certain people seek comfort in tradition, totally get it, and not everybody grows at the same time. It took a lot of Americans to get comfortable with gay marriage. It took a lot of people, many still aren't comfortable with legal cannabis. And there's a lot of sports fans, like they are just kicking and screaming. Here's all I know about college football. Ohio State can lose as a 20-point favorite and still get in. It's like, of course they should get in. Of course they're one of the 12 best teams. And Ohio State's opening with Texas. Texas is opening with Ohio State. It doesn't matter who loses. Ohio State lost to Oregon. It doesn't matter. In the end, if it's a competitive game, they'll both get into the playoff.
I mean, I'm open-minded like you, but there are parts like I do think watching the NCAA tournament, it was weird seeing Oregon play Arizona and going, this is a Big 10 versus Big 12 matchup. that was a little bizarre in the Sweet 16. But like, should Washington State be in a Power Four conference? I appreciate how hard they try and everything. They should probably play Boise State, Fresno State, and San Diego State. That feels right. So it's like you could argue you could even trim the fat with some of the teams in the Big 10. Right. So, I mean, some of these programs like
Rutgers.
Yeah. I mean, Maryland. I mean, you see that coach, he's like, I'm out for Villanova, so it's just like, I think it's ultimately going to happen an AFC, NFC version of college football.
Yes,
and it's
yes.
clear where it's headed. It's the SEC and the Big Ten. We know Notre Dame, they'll gravitate to, where Clemson and Florida State and Miami will gravitate to, and North Carolina. Maybe you take Stanford and some of the academic schools with you to the northern one, and that's what's going to happen. And then you only play each other. Because why? The other thing is now with the amount of money that's on the line, why would I pay UC Davis or Montana to come in for $1.5 million? Why wouldn't we just, the NFL would never do that. They just pool their money and they keep it to spread it with their partners. That's why the SEC gets so angry. They're making so much money and they push back. We should get more people into the playoffs. And I don't even think they're necessarily wrong, but it's like, how about we all get under the same umbrella?
Yeah.
And then those teams all have the opportunity to go. But like the NFL, everyone's playing everybody. They don't like randomly, the Patriots don't get to schedule the UFL, the Birmingham Bombers, right? Right? Because they got the Bills coming up next week. And that to me is the next step, which it feels closer to like 10 years away than 2 years away, but it does feel inevitable at this point in time, right? With the amount of money and with how much they're going to have to pay these players, because obviously the quarterbacks make a lot of money, but you and I hear stories about how much some of these other guys are making. It's the numbers aren't going to go down. They're only going to rise. Right. So let's pool all of our money like the NFL or like the NBA and just keep everyone in the same pool. And it sucks, but Washington States and the Fresno States and you're kind of just shit out of luck.
Yeah. John Middlekauff, as always, buddy. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Colin.